In the heart of a bustling city known for its vibrant food culture, there stood an upscale restaurant named La Belle Vie. The name meant the beautiful life, and it lived up to its reputation. Patrons from all walks of life, business executives in tailored suits, celebrities hiding behind oversized sunglasses, and couples celebrating special occasions, flocked to this establishment. Its elegant interior, soft lighting, and exquisite menu made it one of the most sought-after dining spots in town. On a crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves swirled outside the restaurant's glass doors, a woman entered La Belle Vie. She was dressed impeccably, wearing a sleek blazer over a simple yet sophisticated blouse paired with tailored trousers. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she approached the host stand. At first glance, she appeared no different than any other patron who frequented the place. But beneath her calm exterior lay a mind sharp enough to navigate boardrooms and build empires. Her name was Andrea Carter, though no one at La Belle Vie knew that yet. Andrea wasn't just another customer looking for a memorable meal. She was a highly successful entrepreneur with a portfolio of thriving businesses under her belt. Recently, through one of her investment ventures, she had quietly acquired La Belle Vie. It wasn't something she advertised publicly, at least not yet. Tonight, Andrea had come to experience her new acquisition firsthand, to see how things operated when the owner wasn't around. The host greeted her warmly, unaware of her true identity. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to La Belle Vie. Do you have a reservation?" he asked politely. Andrea nodded and gave her name. A few taps on his tablet later, the host found her booking and led her toward a prime table near the large windows overlooking the cityscape. As they walked past tables filled with diners engaged in animated conversations, Andrea took note of everything: the clinking of glasses, the aroma of gourmet dishes wafting through the air, the attentive servers weaving between tables like choreographed dancers. When she reached her seat, Andrea settled in gracefully, draping her coat over the back of her chair. She scanned the room, observing the staff's movements and interactions with guests. Everything seemed to run smoothly until a man in a dark suit approached her table. He carried himself with an air of authority, his posture rigid and his expression unreadable. This was Richard Hayes, the restaurant manager. Richard prided himself on maintaining high standards at La Belle Vie. Over the years, he had cultivated a reputation for being meticulous, detail-oriented, and sometimes overly critical. While many admired his dedication to excellence, others whispered about his tendency to judge people based on appearances. To Richard, success was often tied to wealth and status, and he believed that certain individuals simply didn't belong in places like La Belle Vie. Unfortunately for Andrea, tonight she would become the subject of his scrutiny. As Richard drew closer to her table, his gaze lingered on her outfit. Though perfectly appropriate for fine dining, something about Andrea's appearance rubbed him the wrong way. Maybe it was the understated elegance of her attire, or the quiet confidence she exuded. Whatever it was, Richard decided almost immediately that she didn't fit the image he associated with La Belle Vie's clientele. "Good evening," Richard began, his tone clipped and formal. "I hope you understand that our dress code is quite specific here. Perhaps next time you could arrive more appropriately attired." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Around them, nearby diners paused their conversations. Curious about the exchange unfolding before them, Andrea looked up at him, her expression calm but piercing. She didn't flinch or react defensively. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "Thank you for letting me know. I'll keep that in mind." Her response was measured, betraying none of the irritation simmering beneath the surface. Richard, satisfied that he'd asserted his dominance, moved on, leaving Andrea to peruse the menu. But Andrea wasn't deterred. In fact, she found the entire situation intriguing. Rather than feeling offended, she saw it as an opportunity, a chance to observe how someone in a position of authority handled themselves when they thought no one was watching. Little did Richard know he was about to learn a valuable lesson about assumptions, respect, and accountability. For now, Andrea continued her meal, savoring each bite while keeping a close eye on Richard's behavior. She noticed how he interacted with other patrons, offering warm smiles and polite conversation to those he deemed worthy, while barely acknowledging others. It was clear that Richard operated under a set of biases that influenced his treatment of customers, and tonight, Andrea was determined to expose those biases for what they were. As the evening wore on, Andrea couldn't help but reflect on the irony of the situation. Here she was, the owner of the very establishment where she was being judged unfairly. Yet, instead of revealing her identity right away, she chose to remain silent, allowing events to unfold naturally. She knew that patience and timing were key if she wanted to make a lasting impact, not just on Richard but on the entire culture of La Belle Vie. With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Andrea leaned back in her chair, ready to see where the night would take her. What started as a routine visit to her newest acquisition was quickly turning into something far more interesting and potentially transformative. As the evening unfolded, Andrea continued to observe Richard Hayes with a mix of curiosity and quiet determination. Her initial encounter with him had set the tone for what would become an increasingly uncomfortable experience. Richard's earlier comment about her attire had been dismissive, but it was only the beginning of his attempts to assert dominance over someone he assumed was beneath him. After placing her order, a perfectly cooked filet mignon paired with a glass of red wine, Andrea leaned back in her chair, watching as Richard made his rounds through the restaurant. He moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to check on tables or exchange pleasantries with patrons who clearly fit his idea of ideal customers. To those individuals, he was all smiles, offering compliments about their choices or sharing anecdotes about the chef's latest creations. But when his gaze landed on Andrea again, his demeanor shifted noticeably. Richard approached her table once more, this time holding a bottle of wine. "Ma'am," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "I noticed you've chosen a red wine with your meal. Are you certain that's what you'd prefer? Typically, our guests opt for something lighter with steak." His tone suggested that she lacked knowledge about fine dining, subtly implying that she might not belong in such an exclusive setting. Andrea looked up at him, her expression unreadable. She took a moment before responding, choosing her words carefully. "Thank you for your suggestion," she said smoothly, her voice calm but firm. "But I'm quite familiar with pairing wines. This will suit my taste just fine." Her response left no room for further argument, yet Richard seemed unwilling to let the matter drop. He lingered by her table, shifting uncomfortably as though searching for another way to assert his authority. Finally, he added, "Very well. If you're sure, we'll proceed with your choice, though I must say some of our other offerings might enhance your experience here tonight." The implication was clear. He doubted her ability to make informed decisions and wanted her to feel out of place. The subtle jabs kept coming. When the server arrived with Andrea's appetizer, a delicate plate of seared scallops, Richard hovered nearby, scrutinizing every detail. As the dish was placed in front of her, he remarked, "This is one of our signature dishes. I trust you'll find it satisfactory." His emphasis on the word satisfactory carried a hint of skepticism, as if he expected her to be underwhelmed. Andrea didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she picked up her fork, sampled a bite, and nodded appreciatively. "It's excellent," she said simply, meeting his gaze without flinching. For a brief moment, Richard appeared taken aback, perhaps surprised by her composure, but he quickly recovered, plastering a thin smile on his face before excusing himself to attend to other matters. Despite his absence, Andrea could feel his eyes on her from across the room. Every so often, she caught him glancing in her direction, his expression unreadable but undeniably critical. It was as though he couldn't shake the notion that she didn't belong there, that she was somehow disrupting the carefully curated atmosphere of La Belle Vie. What he failed to realize, however, was that Andrea wasn't just enduring his behavior, she was studying it. Between bites of her meal, Andrea reflected on the dynamics at play. Richard's actions weren't merely rude. They were emblematic of a deeper issue within the restaurant's culture. His tendency to judge people based on appearances revealed a lack of inclusivity and respect, qualities that should have been foundational to any successful business. And while Andrea understood that managing a high-end establishment came with its own set of challenges, she also believed that true leadership meant treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their background or outward appearance. As dessert arrived, a decadent chocolate soufflé accompanied by fresh berries, Richard made one final attempt to assert his superiority. Leaning in slightly, he lowered his voice as though sharing a secret. "Ma'am, I hope you understand that some of our guests might feel uncomfortable if they sense unfamiliarity with fine dining. We strive to maintain a certain standard here at La Belle Vie." His words were veiled enough to avoid outright rudeness, but the underlying message was unmistakable. He saw her as an outsider who didn't measure up. For the first time that evening, Andrea allowed herself a small, knowing smile. She set down her spoon and looked directly at Richard, her dark eyes locking onto his. "Thank you for your concern," she replied evenly. "But I assure you, I'm quite comfortable here. In fact, I think I'll enjoy the rest of my evening immensely." Though her tone remained polite, there was a subtle edge to her words, an unspoken promise that Richard's behavior would not go unchecked. Satisfied that she had planted the seed of doubt in his mind, Andrea returned her attention to her dessert, savoring each bite as though nothing unusual had occurred. Unbeknownst to Richard, Andrea's patience was strategic. She knew that confronting him immediately wouldn't yield the desired outcome. Instead, she intended to gather evidence of his behavior, not just toward her, but toward others as well. Throughout the evening, she had noticed how he treated certain staff members with thinly veiled impatience and how he interacted differently with patrons depending on their perceived status. These observations would prove invaluable later on. As the night drew to a close, Andrea signaled for the bill. When it arrived, she reviewed it carefully, ensuring everything was correct before signing off on the payment. By now, Richard had retreated to the back of the house, likely convinced that he had successfully intimidated her into silence. Little did he know Andrea had already formulated a plan, one that would leave him questioning everything he thought he knew about La Belle Vie and his role within it. With her coat draped over her arm, Andrea rose from her seat and approached the host stand. "Could you please inform Mr. Hayes that I'd like to speak with the owner?" she asked politely, her voice carrying just enough authority to command attention. The host hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure of how to respond, before nodding and heading toward the manager's office. Moments later, Richard reappeared, his expression guarded but curious. "Ma'am, may I assist you?" he inquired, his tone tinged with apprehension. Andrea smiled faintly, her eyes gleaming with quiet resolve. "Yes, Mr. Hayes," she said. "Let's take this conversation somewhere private, shall we?" And, with that, Andrea turned and walked toward the office, leaving Richard to follow in stunned silence. What awaited him inside would change everything, not just for him, but for the entire culture of La Belle Vie. As Andrea stepped into the private office at the back of La Belle Vie, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. The room was small but tastefully decorated, with framed photographs of past owners lining the walls and a polished mahogany desk sitting in the center. It was clear that this space had been designed to exude power and authority, a fitting setting for what was about to unfold. Richard followed close behind, his brow furrowed as he tried to piece together why Andrea wanted to speak with the owner. He assumed she intended to lodge a complaint or perhaps request some form of compensation for what he believed had been an unremarkable dining experience. His confidence began to return as he reminded himself that he held seniority here. After all, he managed the day-to-day operations of the restaurant. What could this woman possibly say that would rattle him? Once inside, Andrea turned to face Richard, her expression calm but commanding. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Without saying a word, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. Placing it on the desk, she slid it toward him. "I think you'll want to take a look at this," she said simply, her voice steady and unwavering. Richard hesitated for a moment before picking up the paper. As his eyes scanned the document, his face paled. The contract outlined the recent acquisition of La Belle Vie by one of Andrea's investment firms, along with her signature confirming ownership. There was no mistaking it. Andrea Carter wasn't just another patron dissatisfied with her meal. She was now the owner of the very establishment Richard thought he controlled. For several seconds, Richard stood frozen, his mind racing to process the implications. When he finally found his voice, it came out stammering and unsure. "You're the new owner?" he asked, his tone laced with disbelief. Andrea nodded, her composure unshaken. "Yes, Mr. Hayes, I am." The weight of the situation hit Richard like a freight train. All the condescending remarks, the thinly veiled insults, the dismissive attitude. He had directed them at the person who now held ultimate authority over his career. Panic began to creep into his features as he realized how badly he had misjudged the evening. Andrea leaned against the edge of the desk, her arms crossed casually. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her tone measured but firm. "I came here tonight hoping to get a sense of how my newest acquisition operates when the owner isn't present. Unfortunately, your behavior has raised serious concerns about your ability to manage this establishment effectively." Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He scrambled to defend himself, tripping over his words in an attempt to explain away his actions. "Ms. Carter, please, I assure you, this isn't how I normally conduct myself. Tonight must have been an anomaly. I can assure you I treat all our guests with respect." Andrea raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "All guests, Mr. Hayes? Or only those you deem worthy based on their appearance?" Her question hung in the air, sharp and pointed. Richard flinched visibly, unable to deny the accusation. Instead, he shifted uncomfortably, searching for a way to salvage the situation. "I admit, I may have made some assumptions earlier," he conceded reluctantly. "But I promise you it won't happen again. Please give me another chance to prove myself." His desperation was palpable, and Andrea could see the gears turning in his head as he calculated how far he needed to grovel to keep his job. She let the silence stretch for a moment longer, allowing Richard to feel the full weight of his mistake. Then, with deliberate slowness, she spoke. "Mr. Hayes, leadership is not just about maintaining standards. It's about fostering an environment where everyone feels valued and respected. From what I observed tonight, your approach falls far short of that ideal." Her words struck a nerve. Richard's shoulders sagged as he absorbed the critique, realizing there was no easy way out of this predicament. For years, he had prided himself on running La Belle Vie with precision and discipline. But now, faced with undeniable evidence of his shortcomings, he was forced to confront the possibility that his methods might be flawed. Andrea continued, her tone softening slightly, but still carrying an air of authority. "I'm going to conduct a thorough review of your conduct, not just tonight, but over the course of your tenure here. If I find that your behavior aligns with the values I intend to instill at La Belle Vie, then we can discuss moving forward. However, if I discover further issues, I will have no choice but to reconsider your position." The gravity of her statement settled heavily in the room. Richard swallowed hard, nodding mutely as he processed the ultimatum. For the first time in his professional life, he felt truly vulnerable, a stark contrast to the confidence he usually projected. Andrea's calm demeanor masked the storm brewing beneath the surface, and Richard knew better than to underestimate her resolve. Before leaving the office, Andrea added one final remark. "Change starts at the top, Mr. Hayes. If you genuinely wish to continue leading this team, you'll need to demonstrate growth, not just in words, but in action. Consider this your opportunity to do so." With that, she straightened up, collected her belongings, and exited the office, leaving Richard alone to grapple with the magnitude of what had just transpired. As the door clicked shut behind her, he sank into the chair behind the desk, his mind spinning with thoughts of damage control and redemption. Meanwhile, Andrea moved through the restaurant with purpose, exchanging brief smiles with staff members as she prepared to leave. Unbeknownst to her, whispers had already begun to spread among the employees. News traveled fast in such a tightly knit environment, and it wasn't long before rumors reached the kitchen and front-of-house teams about the mysterious woman who had confronted Richard. Some were skeptical, while others dared to hope that change might finally be on the horizon. Over the years, many had silently endured Richard's abrasive management style, biting their tongues to avoid conflict. But now, with Andrea's arrival, they sensed an opportunity for transformation, a chance to reshape the culture of La Belle Vie into something more inclusive and supportive. As Andrea stepped out into the cool night air, she paused for a moment, reflecting on the events of the evening. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Turning around a workplace entrenched in outdated attitudes required patience, persistence, and unwavering commitment. Yet she also understood the importance of accountability and the ripple effect it could create. By addressing Richard's behavior head-on, she hoped to send a clear message. La Belle Vie was entering a new era, one defined by respect, integrity, and excellence. With renewed determination, Andrea climbed into her car and drove off into the night, ready to tackle the challenges that lay ahead. Back at the restaurant, Richard remained in the office, staring blankly at the contract on the desk. The wheels of change were already in motion, and whether he liked it or not, he was now part of a much larger story, one that would test his character and redefine his legacy at La Belle Vie. The next morning, the atmosphere at La Belle Vie was noticeably different. News of Andrea's confrontation with Richard had spread like wildfire among the staff, sparking a mix of curiosity, relief, and cautious optimism. Employees who had long endured Richard's abrasive management style found themselves whispering excitedly in corners, speculating about what this sudden change might mean for the restaurant, and for them personally. In the kitchen, sous chef Marcus leaned against the stainless steel counter during a rare lull, recounting snippets of the story to his team. "I heard she walked right into the office and dropped the contract on his desk," he said, mimicking the motion with an exaggerated flourish. "And when Richard saw it, man, you should have seen his face, like he'd just been caught stealing from the register." The cooks laughed nervously, glancing toward the closed door of Richard's office as though expecting him to burst through at any moment. Though they joked about his discomfort, there was an underlying sense of satisfaction. Many of them had experienced firsthand how Richard's perfectionism often veered into cruelty, whether it was berating servers for minor mistakes or dismissing suggestions from junior chefs. Now faced with the possibility of real accountability, they couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Meanwhile, in the dining area, waitstaff gathered around hostess Lila, who claimed to have overheard part of Andrea's conversation with Richard. "She didn't yell or anything," Lila whispered conspiratorially. But her voice, so calm, so commanding, like she knew exactly what she was doing. She paused dramatically, leaning closer to her audience. "And get this, she told him she's reviewing his conduct. That means he's not safe anymore." The group exchanged wide-eyed looks, their excitement tempered by years of living under Richard's iron grip. While they dared to dream of a workplace free from his micromanagement, skepticism lingered. "Yeah, but do you really think things will change?" asked one server, shrugging. "People like him always find a way to stay in charge." Lila frowned, shaking her head. "Not this time, didn't you hear? She owns the place now. If anyone can shake things up, it's her." As the gossip swirled, Andrea arrived at the restaurant later that afternoon, determined to begin implementing her vision for La Belle. Furcau. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer and trousers, she carried herself with quiet authority, drawing respectful nods from employees as she made her way to the manager's office. Inside, Richard sat hunched over paperwork, his usual confidence replaced by a palpable unease. When Andrea entered, Richard immediately stood, forcing a tight smile. "Ms. Carter," he greeted her, his tone overly formal. "I trust everything is satisfactory today?" Andrea nodded curtly, taking a seat across from him without invitation. "For now," she replied, setting a leather-bound notebook on the desk. "But we need to address some systemic issues if we're going to move forward successfully." Richard shifted uncomfortably, sensing that this meeting wouldn't be a simple follow-up. He nodded slowly, bracing himself for whatever came next. Over the course of the next hour, Andrea outlined her plans for transforming La Belle Vie. She began by emphasizing the importance of inclusivity, not just for customers but for employees as well. This restaurant thrives because of its people, she explained. Every member of your team plays a vital role in creating the experience our guests love. It's time we treat them accordingly. She proposed several initiatives: mandatory diversity training sessions for all staff, revised hiring practices to ensure fairness, and regular check-ins to gauge employee satisfaction. Additionally, she announced her intention to establish an anonymous feedback system, allowing workers to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. Richard listened intently, nodding along even as doubt gnawed at him. These changes sounded ambitious and potentially disruptive. Ms. Carter, he ventured cautiously, while I agree these ideas are commendable, implementing them might take time. We don't want to risk alienating our current clientele. Andrea fixed him with a piercing gaze. Mr. Hayes, excellence isn't achieved by maintaining the status quo. True success comes from evolving and adapting. Our customers will appreciate a more inclusive environment. It won't drive them away. It will attract even more patrons who value authenticity and respect. Her words struck a chord, though Richard wasn't entirely convinced. Still, he recognized that arguing would only dig him deeper into trouble. Instead, he offered a reluctant agreement, promising to support her efforts, at least outwardly. Beyond the office walls, Andrea's presence continued to inspire subtle shifts throughout the restaurant. During her walkthroughs, she took the time to introduce herself to each employee, asking about their roles and sharing her goals for the future. To many, this level of engagement felt unprecedented. Never before had they seen a leader prioritize personal connections over rigid hierarchy. One such interaction occurred in the kitchen, where pastry chef Elena was meticulously decorating a tray of macarons. When Andrea approached, Elena froze, unsure of what to expect, but Andrea simply smiled warmly, extending a hand. "You must be Elena," she said. "I've heard wonderful things about your desserts." Flustered but flattered, Elena shook her hand. "Thank you, Ms. Carter. I try my best." "I can see that," Andrea replied, gesturing to the colorful array of pastries. "Your work speaks for itself. Keep it up. I'm sure our guests love every bite." Small moments like these left a lasting impression on the staff, reinforcing Andrea's commitment to fostering a culture of mutual respect. Even those initially skeptical of her intentions began to soften, recognizing that her actions matched her words. Outside the restaurant, word of Andrea's ownership quickly reached loyal patrons. Some expressed concern, fearing that changes might dilute the exclusivity that drew them to La Belle Vie. Others, however, welcomed the shift, viewing it as an opportunity to align the establishment with modern values of inclusivity and equality. 2. Address these mixed reactions. Andrea hosted a private luncheon for frequent diners, using the occasion to share her vision for the restaurant's future. Standing at the head of the room, she spoke passionately about preserving the elegance and sophistication that defined La Belle Vie, while embracing a broader, more diverse community. "Our goal isn't to reinvent the wheel," she assured them. "It's to enhance what already makes this place special. By welcoming everyone with open arms, we strengthen the foundation upon which La Belle Vie was built." Her speech resonated deeply with many attendees, who applauded her dedication to progress without compromising quality. As the luncheon concluded, Andrea mingled with guests, answering questions and addressing concerns with grace and poise. Back at the restaurant, Richard watched all of this unfold with growing apprehension. Though he publicly supported Andrea's initiatives, privately he worried about losing control. For years he had shaped La Belle Vie according to his own standards, and the thought of relinquishing that power filled him with dread. Yet, despite his fears, Richard couldn't deny the positive impact Andrea's leadership was having. Morale among the staff improved almost overnight, and customers responded enthusiastically to the renewed energy within the restaurant. Even Richard found himself benefiting indirectly, as employees became more motivated and efficient under Andrea's guidance. As days turned into weeks, Andrea remained steadfast in her mission, balancing innovation with tradition. She understood that meaningful change required patience and persistence, but she also knew that the rewards would far outweigh the challenges. With each passing day, La Belle Vie grew stronger, its reputation expanding beyond fine cuisine to encompass a spirit of inclusivity and excellence. For Richard, the journey ahead remained uncertain. Would he rise to meet Andrea's expectations, proving himself capable of growth? Or would his resistance to change ultimately seal his fate? Only time would tell. But one thing was clear. La Belle Vie was no longer the same restaurant it had been before Andrea Carter stepped through its doors, and for most of those involved, that was a change worth celebrating. As the weeks passed, Andrea's presence at La Belle Vie became a constant force of transformation. She didn't just oversee changes from afar, she immersed herself in every aspect of the restaurant's operations, earning the trust and admiration of both employees and patrons alike. Her hands-on approach was evident in everything, from tasting new dishes alongside the chefs to personally greeting customers as they entered the dining room. It wasn't uncommon to see her rolling up her sleeves to help servers during busy shifts or offering constructive feedback to kitchen staff after tasting their creations. Richard Hayes, however, struggled to adapt to this new reality. On the surface, he appeared compliant, nodding along during meetings and publicly endorsing Andrea's initiatives. But beneath his polished exterior, resentment simmered. He had spent years building a reputation as the face of La Belle Vie, and now that identity felt threatened. The more Andrea implemented her vision, the more Richard worried that his role and his legacy was slipping away. Despite his misgivings, Richard couldn't deny the positive impact Andrea's leadership was having on the restaurant. Employee morale soared as workers responded to her inclusive management style. For the first time in years, staff members felt empowered to share ideas without fear of ridicule or retribution. Sous Chef Marcus, for example, proposed adding a seasonal vegetarian tasting menu inspired by local produce. To everyone's surprise, Andrea not only approved the idea, but encouraged him to take full creative control. When the menu launched, it received rave reviews from critics and diners alike, solidifying La Belle Vie's reputation as an innovator in fine dining. Even the front-of-house team experienced a dramatic shift. Hostess Lila noticed a marked improvement in customer interactions once Andrea introduced mandatory training sessions focused on empathy and active listening. Before, we were just taught to smile and follow scripts, Lila explained to her co-workers during a break. Now, we're learning how to truly connect with people. It makes such a difference. The ripple effects extended beyond the staff. Regular patrons began commenting on the warmer atmosphere, noting how the service felt more genuine and attentive. One longtime customer even wrote a glowing review online, praising the new energy at La Belle Vie. The post went viral within the city's foodie circles, drawing curious newcomers eager to experience the buzz firsthand. But while Andrea's efforts earned widespread acclaim, Richard found himself increasingly isolated. His rigid adherence to old-school methods clashed with the evolving culture of the restaurant. Employees who once tiptoed around him now openly questioned his decisions, confident that Andrea would back them up if push came to shove. This loss of authority left Richard feeling vulnerable and defensive, leading to occasional outbursts that only further damaged his standing. One particularly tense incident occurred during a staff meeting when Andrea announced plans to revamp the employee handbook. Among the proposed updates was a clause prohibiting discriminatory behavior of any kind, a direct response to reports of subtle biases among certain managers. As Andrea outlined the policy, Richard interrupted, his voice sharp with frustration. "Ms. Carter, I understand the need for clarity, but isn't this overcomplicating things? We've always managed fine without micromanaging interpersonal dynamics." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Andrea. She regarded Richard calmly, before responding. "Mr. Hayes, managing interpersonal dynamics is precisely what leadership entails. If we want to create a workplace where everyone feels valued, then yes, we must address these issues head-on. Ignoring them won't make them disappear." Her words drew murmurs of agreement from the staff, leaving Richard visibly shaken. For the remainder of the meeting, he sat stiffly in his chair, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Later that evening, he retreated to his office, replaying the confrontation in his mind. It was becoming painfully clear that his traditional mindset no longer aligned with the direction Andrea was steering the restaurant, and fighting against her changes seemed futile. Still, Richard refused to give up entirely. Deep down, he believed he could salvage his position if he proved himself indispensable. In an effort to regain favor, he threw himself into his work, meticulously overseeing every detail of daily operations. He started arriving earlier and staying, later determined to demonstrate his commitment. Yet, despite his best efforts, cracks continued to show. During one particularly chaotic dinner service, a server accidentally spilled red wine on a guest's designer dress. Panicked, the young woman rushed to apologize, only to be met with harsh criticism from Richard. "How hard is it to carry a tray properly?" he snapped loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "This is why we have standards," Andrea happened to witness the exchange from across the room. Without hesitation, she approached the table, apologizing profusely to the guest and offering to cover the cost of cleaning the garment. Once the situation was resolved, she pulled Richard aside. "What you said back there was unacceptable," she told him firmly. "Mistakes happen, Mr. Hayes. Your job is to guide your team, not tear them down." Richard opened his mouth to protest, but Andrea held up a hand, cutting him off. "I know you care about this restaurant, but caring isn't enough. Leadership means lifting others up, not breaking them down when they falter. If you can't do that, then perhaps this role isn't the right fit for you." Her words struck a nerve, forcing Richard to confront the uncomfortable truth. His behavior wasn't just outdated, it was detrimental. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that he might not be the leader La Belle Vie needed moving forward. In the days that followed, Andrea gave Richard a final chance to prove himself. She assigned him to lead a project aimed at improving communication between departments, hoping it would encourage collaboration and foster a sense of unity. At first, Richard approached the task half-heartedly, convinced it was a waste of time. But as he worked closely with various teams, he began to see glimpses of what made La Belle Vie truly special: the passion, creativity, and dedication of its people. Slowly but surely, Richard started to soften. He made a conscious effort to listen more and criticize less, seeking input from employees he had previously dismissed. Though progress was incremental, those around him noticed the change. Servers who once avoided eye contact with him now greeted him with tentative smiles. And even Marcus acknowledged his contributions during a brainstorming session. For Andrea, watching Richard's gradual transformation was both satisfying and bittersweet. She knew he still had a long way to go, but she also recognized the value of giving someone the opportunity to grow. By holding him accountable while offering support, she hoped to inspire meaningful change, not just in Richard, but in the entire culture of La Belle Vie. By the end of the month, the restaurant was thriving in ways no one could have anticipated. Revenue increased thanks to glowing reviews and word-of-mouth recommendations, and employee retention rates soared as workers embraced the renewed sense of purpose Andrea had instilled. Even Richard, though far from perfect, had taken steps toward becoming the leader the restaurant deserved. As Andrea stood in the bustling dining room one evening, observing the seamless flow of activity around her, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. La Belle Vie was no longer just a business. It was a testament to the power of inclusivity, respect, and perseverance. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, Andrea knew that together they could overcome anything.